I was having this thought just now about how quickly we've progressed as a race, a human race, especially recently, in the past 100 years, 50 years, 20 years, even 10 years. And we look at how big a generation is. Gen Z, I think, is 96 to 2012, so that will be 16 years, give or take, per generation. And I watched a video today by Jimmy the Giant. He's a great YouTuber for politics. If you watch him, if you want to learn about just shit about how the world works, more specifically how the UK works, he's very informative. Anyway, he was talking about what people were doing 500 years ago, 300 years ago, 100 years ago. And it made me think how quickly, as I said earlier, we've changed and how quickly we will change. And it made me think, can you compare generations across the same variables? Can you set the variables the same? Because I was trying to think, you can't. Theoretically, yes, if you want to assume a bunch of stuff which is unchanging, which will never be the case. But comparing generations, I think it's naive to live a life where you're a product of your generation, because everyone is. And you try and extrapolate that, you try and translate that, and preface it onto somebody else of a different generation. Now, this is just talking about generation. It's not even talking about location. It's not talking about situation. It's not talking about culture. All these things which make and add to your identity, to who you are and what you see yourself being. And I don't think you can reliably compare generations equally. Every generation had their own problems. Every point in history, to an extent, people thought the world was ending. So if you're looking at other people and comparing your present self with how you imagine people would have been at your age in their time, and you may think it's better, you may think it's worse, sure, but whatever result you come out with, it's limited because there's so many factors which you don't see, which make that comparison. Let's say you reminisce on children having no phones. Every person I speak to my age says, at least when I bring it up, I don't know, they say, oh yeah, I would have preferred to live with the time without phones, without social media. And that's easy to say because we take for granted the good things about having a phone, the essentially 24-hour access and contact we have with the people we love and our friends. But the drawbacks of this are widely agreed upon. A lot of people agree that there's a problem with phones, even for adults. And let's say in this situation, we're reminiscing about a time where kids didn't have phones. So a teenager growing up in the 1990s or 1980s, and you think of how maybe you would have been different if phones didn't exist, how life would have been different if phones didn't exist. Now, I'm not one to think like this very often because I believe in the butterfly effect, where you are here right now due to the summation of every action you've taken before this moment, whether that's fate or whether that's in your control, whatever that might entail. I believe that it is wrong to go back into the past and say, oh, if I'd done something, things would be different. Because you don't know they'd be different. Yes, there's a probability they would have been different, but you can't be sure, because you changing that decision could have changed something else in the world, which has this whole knock-on effect, which changes the timeline. So, putting that aside, comparing what you could have been if phones weren't around, I don't think it's representative. You are, your personality, your character, your identity, that is a product of the time. For you to look back in time and for that to be the case, you might be a completely different person. You could be a criminal, you could be a murderer, but that still begs the question, doesn't it? So I guess what I'm trying to say is if you look at your parents or you look at your children and you compare yourself to how you were at their age, or how you are when they were your age, it isn't so simple as just comparing it like that. That's all I have to say. And just on the greater time period change as well, just thinking about how much we've changed, it is hard to wrap your head around. Because a year goes by, we think of a year's a long time, 365 days. But when you actually think about it, it isn't that long. And when you come to terms with how long a year actually is, you realize 10 years ago wasn't that far away. 50 years ago wasn't. Even 100 years. Yeah, a stretch. It seems a pretty long way away because it's unlikely that anyone from 100 years ago, born 100 years ago, is still alive today. There's probably a few. But there's such a distance to that period of time because no one's really alive from that period. But it's so much closer than you think. And I was in a lecture today, and there's small pieces of lectures where I go to. It's the same with books. When I read a book, yeah, it's interesting, but a lot of it you don't really remember. A lot of it doesn't resonate with you. You don't find very useful. Doesn't mean it's useless, but there's moments when you're reading a book and there's moments when you're in a lecture and something gets said where all the blocks fit into place. And there was one today in my lecture, and it was about a phenomenon in psychology called the negativity bias. And this is where humans place a greater level of salience, of mental capacity, of attention to the same magnitude of outcome in the negative direction as opposed to the positive direction. So let's say you win £2,000. Great. Let's say you lose £2,000. What the negativity bias says is losing £2,000 is of a greater impact, of importance to you. Therefore, you pay more attention to it. This is why the news is mostly bad news. It's news you don't want to hear because it's profitable. Newspapers want to make money. They're capitalist entities like any other entity in the UK or the US. And to make money, they want viewership. So they focus on the bad because our evolutionary biology makes it so we are more focused and we care more about the bad version or the dark side of the coin. And that moment in that lecture was one of those moments where it explains so much of human behavior. Anyway, yeah, I was talking to my friend downstairs. I had this thought. I thought I'd just make this video. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching. Catch you later.